The autumn rain drummed softly against the apartment windows as Marcus sat at his small kitchen table, staring at the single crumpled dollar bill in his palm. The worn green paper felt heavier than it should have, carrying the weight of everything he couldn't provide for his daughter. 7-year-old Emma was fast asleep in her bedroom, her breathing steady and peaceful in the quiet apartment. She had no idea that this dollar represented all the money her father had left in the world. No idea that tomorrow was her birthday, and he had nothing to give her except his love. Marcus closed his eyes and rubbed his temples. The past year had been a series of crushing blows. First, the factory where he'd worked for 8 years had closed down without warning. Then his wife Sarah had lost her battle with cancer, leaving him alone with Emma and a mountain of medical bills that seemed to grow taller every day. His savings had vanished like morning mist, spent on treatments that couldn't save the woman he loved. Now, 3 months after the funeral, Marcus was barely keeping their heads above water. He'd taken a job at a local diner, washing dishes for minimum wage, but it wasn't enough. The rent was 2 weeks overdue, the electricity bill sat unopened on the counter, and the refrigerator held little more than a carton of milk and some crackers. But it was Emma's birthday tomorrow. His little girl, who had been so brave through everything, deserved something special. She hadn't asked for anything elaborate, just mentioned once that she'd love a new book to read. Emma had always been a quiet child, finding comfort in stories when the real world became too difficult to bear. Marcus looked at the dollar again. He could buy a candy bar, maybe. Or save it for bus fare to get to work next week. But neither option felt right for Emma's special day. The next morning arrived gray and overcast. Emma bounded into the kitchen with the kind of energy only children possess, her dark curls bouncing as she hugged Marcus around the waist. "Good morning, Daddy," she said, her voice bright despite everything they'd been through. "Is it really my birthday?" "It really is, sweetheart," Marcus replied, his heart aching with love for this resilient little person who had become his entire world. "Happy birthday, Em." She looked around the small kitchen, her eyes searching but not disappointed. Emma had learned not to expect much, though Marcus wished desperately that weren't the case. She simply smiled and settled at the table for her usual breakfast of toast and jam. After Emma left for school, Marcus stood in front of the bathroom mirror, adjusting his only clean shirt. He'd made a decision during the sleepless night. He would take that dollar to the used bookstore downtown and see what he could find. Maybe there would be something, anything, that would bring joy to Emma's face. The bookstore sat wedged between a laundromat and a coffee shop, its windows dusty but welcoming. A bell chimed softly as Marcus entered, and the familiar smell of old paper and binding glue wrapped around him like a gentle embrace. The elderly woman behind the counter looked up from her reading. Her silver hair was pulled back in a loose bun, and her glasses hung on a chain around her neck. She had the kind of face that suggested she'd spent years listening to people's stories. "Can I help you find something?" she asked, her voice warm and patient. Marcus felt his cheeks flush with embarrassment. "I'm looking for a book for my daughter. She's 7, loves to read. I only have." He pulled out the crumpled dollar. "I only have this much." The woman's expression didn't change, but something soft flickered in her eyes. 7 years old, you said. What kinds of stories does she enjoy? She likes adventures and fairy tales. She's been through some tough times lately, and books help her escape, I think. The woman nodded thoughtfully. "I believe I have just the thing." She disappeared between the towering shelves, leaving Marcus to wait in the quiet store. When she returned, she carried a beautiful hardcover book. The cover showed a young girl on a magical journey, illustrated in soft pastels that seemed to glow in the dim light of the store. The title read, "The Secret Garden of Dreams." Marcus's heart sank. The book was clearly worth much more than $1. "I'm sorry, I don't think I can afford." $1, the woman said firmly, placing the book on the counter. "This book has been waiting for the right child. I can tell your daughter is that child." Marcus stared at her, confusion and gratitude warring in his chest. "Are you sure? It looks almost new." "I'm very sure," she replied, taking his dollar with a gentle smile. Sometimes the most valuable things don't cost what we expect them to. As she wrapped the book in brown paper, she looked up at Marcus. "You're a good father. That little girl is lucky to have someone who would spend his last dollar on her happiness." Marcus walked home in a daze, clutching the wrapped book against his chest. When Emma burst through the door after school, her face lit up at the sight of the package. "For me," she whispered, as if speaking too loudly might make it disappear. "For you, birthday girl." Emma carefully unwrapped the book, her small fingers reverent with each fold of paper. When she saw the cover, her eyes went wide with wonder. "Oh, Daddy, it's beautiful. How did you know this was exactly what I wanted?" That evening, they curled up together on the old couch, Emma reading aloud from her new book. Her voice filled their small apartment with magic and adventure, transforming their humble space into a palace of possibility. As Emma's eyelids grew heavy, she looked up at her father. "This is the best birthday ever, Daddy. Not because of the book, but because we're together." Marcus felt tears prick his eyes. In that moment, he realized that the woman at the bookstore had been right. The most valuable things didn't always cost what you expected. Love, presence, and the simple act of caring for someone else, these were worth more than any amount of money. Later, after Emma had fallen asleep with the book clutched against her chest, Marcus sat in the kitchen with a cup of tea. Tomorrow would bring the same challenges, bills to pay, rent to worry about, a future that remained uncertain. But tonight, his daughter was happy. Tonight, he had been enough. And sometimes, Marcus realized, being enough was everything. The rain had stopped, and through the window, he could see the first stars appearing in the clearing sky. Tomorrow would be a new day, full of possibilities he couldn't yet imagine. But whatever came next, he and Emma would face it together, rich in the ways that truly mattered.